You never forget the first time you realized that evil doesn't snarl. It smiles, it offers you coffee, listens patiently, mirrors your hopes, echoes your pain, and all the while, it's mapping you not to understand but to use. In 1997, in the city of Kobe, Japan, a severed head was found at the gates of a school. A note was stuffed into the mouth. It read, "This is the beginning of the game." The killer was 14. When asked why he did it, he said, "Only through pain do I feel peace, not revenge, not rage, peace." We tell ourselves that evil must look like madness, like chaos, like heat. But what if evil isn't heat at all? What if it's cold? What if it walks calmly into the room, makes perfect eye contact, and says all the right things? Carl Jung once wrote, "The criminal becomes a popular figure because he unburdens the conscience of others. They know where evil is." But what if that's a lie we tell ourselves to sleep at night? What if the real evil is the one we invite in? The one who looks the part, the one who plays the part, the one whose mask is so perfect that you never think to look underneath. What if you've already met one? What if you've already shaken hands with someone just like that boy? And worse, what if you admired them? That's what makes the psychopath terrifying. Not the blood, not the body count. The ease with which they pass through the world unnoticed. The way they reflect us so cleanly we never question the reflection. Jung called this the shadow, the part of us we refuse to face. Our anger, our cruelty, our selfishness. Most people suppress it. Most people fear it. The psychopath doesn't. He lets it lead. This is what it looks like when the shadow is unbound, when it isn't hidden or restrained or healed, but crowned. And it doesn't look like a monster. It looks like a man in a suit, a lover with steady hands, a child with a calm voice, a smile with nothing behind it. This story isn't about killers, it's about masks, and the terrifying question behind them. If the shadow wore a smile, would you still recognize it? Because sometimes what we fear most isn't that evil walks among us, it's that we let it in, complimented its charm, and never thought to ask who or what was looking back. Karl Panzram wasn't hiding. He confessed to 21 murders, over 1,000 assaults, and the burning of entire towns. In his own words, "I hate the whole damned human race, including myself. I regret only that I do not have more lives to take." But this isn't a tale of a madman, it's a portrait of a mind that never knew empathy, a soul that never found soil. Panzram was brutalized in childhood, whipped until blood soaked his shirt, beaten until tenderness dried up. What emerged wasn't a man seeking revenge, it was a man who believed in nothing but domination. He wasn't haunted by his darkness, he was governed by it. Carl Jung warned us, the more unconscious one is, the more the devil drives him. In most people, the shadow lurks, barely restrained by conscience, guilt, or love. But in the psychopath, the shadow ascends, it takes the throne. No more struggle, no more war between better angels and darker instincts, just reign. Jung called it possession, not by an outside demon, but by the repressed inner world finally unshackled. And when that possession becomes permanent, the ego doesn't resist, it serves. Panzram didn't slip, he surrendered. But not all psychopathy wears brutality on its sleeve. Some of it starts in silence. Beth Thomas, just 6 years old, smiled as she described wanting to kill her little brother. Her voice was gentle, her vocabulary was precise, her emotions were absent. She wasn't born that way, she was abused before she could walk, abused until her shadow was the only part of her left. At that age, she wasn't a monster, she was an echo, a human psyche reduced to survival. And survival without love, without guidance, without integration, becomes strategy, becomes cruelty, becomes void. Here's the paradox. The shadow we fear in others might be the same one we carry in ourselves. Not in its scale, but in its form. Because haven't you felt it? That flash of envy, that casual cruelty? That moment when hurting someone didn't feel wrong, it felt good. Most people retreat from that moment. The psychopath steps into it, not by accident, by allegiance. He accepts the shadow's rule, not as a guest, As King Jung warned that until we face what lives in our own unconscious, it will control us, and we'll call it fate. But the psychopath doesn't call it fate. He calls it freedom. No remorse, no hesitation, no second thoughts, just impulse and execution. And this is what makes him most terrifying. He is not chaos, he is clarity. He doesn't ask if he should, he asks if he can. And when the answer is yes, he acts. Because when the shadow is unbound, it doesn't hide, it leads. And the rest of us, we look on disturbed, unsettled, because something deep down whispers, you felt that too. And the only difference is what you did next. You can measure a soul not by how it feels its own pain, but by how it responds to someone else's. In most of us, pain echoes. When we see someone suffer, something flinches inside. We wince, we soften, we pause. But in the mind of a psychopath, that echo never comes. MRI scans tell the story. When they watch a face twist in agony, the empathy centers of their brain stay still. Their emotional networks are silent. But when asked to imagine their own suffering, the lights come on. They feel for themselves. They just don't feel for you. And that absence, it isn't passive. It's strategic. It creates space for something else to grow. Manipulation, deception, predation. This is where the metaphor sharpens. If the human soul is a constellation of emotions, love, guilt, empathy, conscience, then the psychopath is a black hole in its place. Not because it's broken, because it was never built. And like a black hole, it doesn't explode, it pulls, it draws people in toward charm, competence, warmth even, but when they get too close, they realize the light they saw was only reflection. There's nothing underneath. Some of them climb, they become surgeons who never shake. Brokers who never panic, leaders who never blink. We call them fearless. We promote them, we follow them, because we've confused stillness with strength. Carl Jung spoke of the absence of self as the most dangerous kind of possession, not by hatred, not even by desire, but by a total identification with control. A person no longer centered in the self, but in the shadow. And in some cases, society rewards that shadow. That's the contrarian truth no one wants to say aloud. What if the psychopath isn't a mistake? What if he's an adaptation? In war, in business, in politics, the ability to move without conscience, to act with precision while others flinch, can look like leadership. In crisis, we applaud detachment. But what kind of future are we building if empathy becomes a liability? What happens when the very traits that make us human, regret, connection, compassion, are seen as signs of weakness? This is why the psychopath isn't just a monster to fear. He's a mirror. He forces us to ask, what parts of ourselves have we turned off just to survive? And when we see someone crying and feel nothing, when we lie because it's easier, when we hurt someone and feel no pull to make it right, that's not psychopathy, but it's close enough to whisper. Because the black hole isn't only out there. Sometimes it's in the parts of ourselves we stopped listening to, and the question isn't whether you're like him. The question is, what's the distance between who you are and who you'd be if empathy disappeared? We think the predator lurks in the shadows, but the truth is more unsettling. The predator wears a lanyard, holds a corner office, buys dinner, and tells you exactly what you want to hear. Psychopathy isn't always hidden. Sometimes it's dressed in charisma, in calm, in confidence so refined that it never occurs to us to question it. Because we've built a world that doesn't just tolerate the mask, it crowns it. We say we value empathy, but in practice, we reward the performance of it far more than the presence of it. We promote those who can stay cold in crisis. We admire the partner who never gets jealous, never gets rattled. We follow the leader who doesn't flinch, doesn't cry, doesn't pause. But what if that steadiness is emptiness? What if the calm is not self-control, but absence of conscience? Jung warned us about the persona, the mask we wear to meet the world. He said that when we over-identify with it, we lose access to the self, and if there's nothing behind the persona, there is only void. The psychopath doesn't forget the mask is a lie. He simply doesn't care. He curates it like a weapon, and when the charm expires, he discards you. quietly, neatly, without a second thought. This isn't fiction, this is biology, this is politics, this is dating apps, this is everywhere. It's Fafnir, the Norse man who murdered his own kin for treasure and transformed into a dragon to guard it. Not because he needed it, because he couldn't stand the thought of anyone else having it. He became his hunger, he became his greed, and he lost the man he once was. This isn't a cautionary tale about monsters. It's a map of the systems that build them, because what we praise, we multiply. We call him sharp, we call him high performer, we call him decisive. We never ask what his empathy looks like behind closed doors. And when he finally shows his teeth, we're surprised. But we shouldn't be. We clapped for the mask. We gave it our vote, our trust, our love. And the person behind it, they were never really there, so maybe the question isn't, how do psychopaths rise so far? Maybe the question is, why do we keep building the staircase? Because when image matters more than character, when smooth words outrank slow truths, when we confuse calm for conscience, the mask doesn't just get worn, it gets worshipped. And that throne, it doesn't stay empty for long. Not all violence screams. Some of it whispers. Some of it wears a suit, follows rules, checks the right boxes. It doesn't rage, it recites. It doesn't explode, it calculates. And when it leaves you bleeding, it won't even look back, because it didn't feel anything in the first place. This is where evil becomes harder to define, because it doesn't look like hatred anymore. It looks like a blank space, like absence. Carl Jung said, "The more unconscious one is, the more the devil drives him. But what if the devil isn't an impulse? What if it's indifference? What if it's not desire for destruction, but the failure to register another human being at all?" Psychopathy doesn't require hatred. It doesn't need revenge. It functions just fine without either. Its cruelty isn't hot, it's cold, clinical. It doesn't shout, "I hate you." It simply says nothing. And that silence is not peace. It's erasure. Philosopher Hannah Arendt called it the banality of evil. She saw it in Adolf Eichmann, not a monster frothing at the mouth, but a bureaucrat, a man who murdered not out of rage, but obedience, out of detachment. Camus said, "The evil that is in the world always comes of ignorance. But this isn't ignorance of information, it's ignorance of empathy. It's the inability or refusal to recognize that someone else's suffering matters." This is the psychopath's world, not built on sadism, built on emptiness. And here's where the paradox sharpens. The more they feel for themselves, the less they feel for others. They're not numb, they're focused entirely inward. Their world has one center. Everything else is orbiting debris, even you, and the tragedy is some of them seem so normal, so put together, so articulate. We want to believe someone who smiles like that must feel something. But sometimes the smile is the most dangerous part, because it reassures you, it lowers your guard. It makes you think there's a soul behind it. But what if there isn't? What if that smile is just the last flicker of light before the pull of the black hole? That's what we confront here, not the presence of darkness, but the absence of anything else. And if that's the case, then maybe the real danger isn't evil that wants to hurt. Maybe it's the kind that doesn't care if you're hurt at all. That's the void behind the smile, not malevolence, indifference. And maybe that's what makes it most terrifying of all, because when you realize someone never felt for you, when you realize the connection was one way, when you look into their eyes and find no echo of your pain, you're not just heartbroken, you're erased. And that is not a wound, that is an unmarking of your humanity. And some part of you deep down knows it's happened before, maybe in a relationship that left you hollow, maybe in a moment you were used and then discarded, maybe in the reflection of someone who said all the right things and meant none of them. The psychopath lives in that space, not as a visitor, but as a native. And if the rest of us don't learn to recognize the mask, not just in others, but in the parts of ourselves that choose detachment over feeling, we risk becoming fluent in the same language, silence, apathy, erasure. And the worst part, no one will scream when it happens, because in that world no one remembers how. Carl Jung never taught us to destroy the shadow. He taught us to turn and face it, to learn its shape, to speak its language, to bring it into consciousness so that it would no longer rule us from below, because what you don't own will own you. The psychopath is what happens when the shadow is not confronted, not negotiated with, not integrated, but enthroned. It doesn't just influence the personality, it becomes it. But that's not where the story ends, because even in the darkest psyche there is still a contrast, a choice. The difference between a mask and a mirror, between control and connection, between being ruled by the void and learning to carry it with compassion. This is what Jung called individuation. The process by which the fragmented parts of the psyche are made whole. It's not perfection, it's not sainthood, it's integration. It's standing at the door of your own darkness and saying, "You do not frighten me, you are part of me, but you are not the king." That's the fire that doesn't consume, the fire that illuminates. Rumi said, "Darkness is your candle, and when you carry it with care, it reveals not just what you fear, but what you are capable of surviving." Beth Thomas was once labeled the child of rage. She wanted to hurt her brother. She couldn't feel remorse. She seemed hollow. But through years of structured therapy, love and unflinching boundaries, something began to change. She began to feel. She began to care. Today, she is a nurse, a woman whose shadow once ruled her, now trained in compassion, in patience, in healing. That's the difference between shadow unbound and shadow integrated, between destruction and transformation. Even Angulimala, the killer of 99 souls, laid down his blade when he met the gaze of the Buddha. Not with punishment, but with stillness. The worst of us are not beyond change, but only if something interrupts the silence. And that something is you. Because the truth is, you've seen the mask. You've stared into the black hole. You've recognized the dragon that guards its treasure of pride and power and praise. And still you feel. Still you flinch at pain. Still you tremble when love is lost. That trembling is not your flaw, it's your proof. Proof that the shadow has not devoured you. That your throne is still occupied by a self that remembers what matters. And if this journey cracked something open inside you, if it gave shape to something you've only felt in fragments, speak. Leave your thoughts below. Share this with someone who's worn the mask too long or who's been erased by someone else's silence. Not just for them, for you, because in that one act of expression, something sacred happens. The shadow steps aside and the self steps forward, not perfectly but consciously. And in that moment, with eyes open and fire in hand, you become the kind of person no psychopath can imitate. A person who feels. A person who remembers, a person who burns but is not consumed, and the world needs more of you.